All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first Jewish Stand podcast. I'm delighted to welcome our guest, Shaked Avidan, all the way from Israel. Shaked is an artist, an animator living in Givat Ada in Israel. Having studied visual communication, Shaked aspires to make Zionist and conservative values desirable using art and beauty. Shaked has published a new graphic novel, Magic Academy, which is available for sale in Israel in both Hebrew and English, about the modern shortcomings of the academic and Western world. If you want a link for Shaked's graphic novel book, you'll find it on our website on the Jewish Stand. We are going to be talking about Shaked's article, which you haven't read. If you haven't yet read Shaked's article, you'll find it on the JewishStand.com. Shaked has written already 3 articles. I couldn't recommend it more. They're excellent articles. First one about art, so interesting or ugly, the state of Western art. The second one was about analysis and the importance of political consensus, where you wrote about the Overton window. If you want to know about how political consensus and narratives, interact with each other, then I would highly recommend you read that article. And his latest article called I Was Born into Peace and I Didn't Like It, writing about your experience growing up in Israel and today with the war in Iran and all that's going on with that. So in time of recording this article, it's the 2nd of July. We don't exactly know what's going to happen in the next couple of days with the ceasefire, but what we are going to be talking about is the article that you wrote about your experience in Israel and what led you to write this article. So the first question, Shaked, before we start is,
Right.
How are you and how is your family at this time?
Oh, great. Wonderful. So you said you're not gonna know what will happen with the ceasefire, but I know what will happen with the ceasefire. There will be no nukes. There will be 0 nukes coming at us from Iran. That's what's gonna happen.
Is that what you want to happen, or is that what you think is going to happen?
That is definitely what is going to happen.
Definitely going to happen. Yeah. Why do you say that?
Oh, because Israel destroyed all their nuclear facilities, all their ballistic missile facilities, killed off their lead scientists and lead generals, and there are certain uranium enrichment sites that are too deep underground that we just don't have the bomb and the planes to carry the bomb that can reach that deep underground. And those ones were bombed by the famous B-2 bombers by the United States to join the operation. So
Right.
no nukes.
No nukes.
And that's the
Bezrat Hashem, please God, that will really last. Well, there's also the ceasefire coming out of Gaza that's been talked about today. We don't know what's going to happen when this is uploaded. It might already have happened. Things are moving so fast in the Middle East; it's really hard to keep up sometimes.
Yeah, but it's not. That's not that interesting, I think, because it's not. I don't know how people think about it abroad, but in Israel there is no. It's like arguing over how to package what's going to happen first and what's going to happen second. But basically, there are not many possibilities of what can happen with Gaza, with the Gaza Strip. We at some phase we're going to have to conquer the entire Gaza Strip and disarm everybody. So if it's going to happen now, if we're going to have a ceasefire to get some of our hostages back, and then we're going to do it, it doesn't matter that much. And I trust the elected government and Netanyahu that I voted for many times over my life to manage it correctly, like he did up until now. So if we're going to stop now to get more hostages, or we're going to go ahead and conquer the entire Gaza Strip, it's fine.
Okay, so before we get into that, before we unpack all what you said, I think we'll start then first again repeating, how are you, Shaked, in terms of you yourself, and how's your family? You know, the war in Iran has been crazy when all the rockets went flying by, and middle of the night, middle of the day, you can't really live properly. So how are you guys doing?
Oh, we're doing great. It's not that. First of all, luckily, no rocket hit near us, but we just running to the shelter in the middle of the night. It's not a big deal, and it only lasted about a week and a half. And the people in the south of Israel and before that in the north of Israel used to live like that for many years, for decades basically. The people in the south of Israel, in Ashkelon and in Tivot and in Sderot, used to live like that from 2005 basically up until now. So now this war is going to end. They're living under constant missile fire and ended the threat to the north, used to fire missiles at the northern civilians. And also the Iranians who plotted firing atomic bombs at us. So and the price I had to pay is basically to sometimes run to the shelter for about a week and a half. Good deal on my side. It's a good bargain on my side.
It's a very optimistic
Happy to do
take.
it.
Yeah, it's a very
Yeah.
optimistic take that it's something that you are willing to do, because as much as people in the south have been living the way they've been living for however long, this is the entire country is living like that. I myself got my flight cancelled. That's the biggest price I had to pay, that I couldn't come to Israel. But the whole country was living under the threat of these ballistic missiles coming in. So this must have been a very new experience.
We actually had something similar with the missiles from Yemen, but they did not pack as much as heavy as a warhead as the missiles from Iran. The missiles from Iran have a much bigger warhead, so they can do a lot more damage. But during this war, during the past 2 years, we also got fired on missiles from Yemen that basically targeted the entire country. But it's not. Look, basically, you just have to be a little more cautious now for a very limited time, for about a couple of weeks, in order to remove all the threats to us from the Middle East, all the active threats from the Middle East. Who wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want to do it?
Yeah. So let's start off with our first question. Before we get into what's going on now, it's, I think, really important to know how we got to where we got today. And in your article, you wrote about growing up in a country led by people who were pursuing peace, but in doing so, they brought more destruction, they brought more violence and conflict. You were also around 15 when IDF pulled out of Gaza and the disengagement. And then shortly after, Hamas rose to power, and we know how that ended, and we're paying the consequences now. So first question is, what was it like growing up in that time? How do you see its effects today?
Basically, the effects are very obvious because the 90s created the Oslo Accords, which basically, up until then, the Arab settlements did not have a sort of representative government with an armed police force. They didn't have it. So what the Oslo Accords did, they say, we need to make peace, but there is no one entity that represents all of the so-called Palestines. That's also, I guess that's a thing for another whole video, but where this word Palestine and this nationality idea came from. It's a whole other thing. Basically, there is no one body that represented the Arabs in Israel or Palestine. And there were some very badly messianic people, very extremely idealistic people who wanted a peace treaty. They never wanted peace. They wanted a peace treaty. And that's a big difference. So what they did, they said, okay, we have to create a government for all these Arabs in Israel. Who's it going to be? So they imported the exiled PLO members, the terrorist organization up until then, PLO members. They basically imported them back into Israel and made them the official government of the entire Arab populations, basically in Judea and Samaria, not in the Green Line, not in the areas of Israel before the Six-Day Wars. So basically they took many villages. All of the Arab villages are basically ruled by a local family. That's how they manage themselves across the entire Middle East. with there are several families, big families, not like 4 or 5 people, yes, not like a grandma and grandpa, I have a large number of families. And even a big city is consisted basically of like 4 major big families, and the biggest one, the most dominant one, is the one that runs the city basically. So every city has kind of a different family, kind of a different tribe that runs it. So the Oslo Accords took these foreign Arabs from other countries who are also terrorist organizations, committed countless acts of terror against Israelis and against basically the entire Western world, and put them above all these other families and gave them gun, and basically created a situation just like in Syria or Egypt or Jordan or every one of the other manufactured countries of the Middle East, that the local populations is ruled by a foreign dictator that was imported into the country, and he has basically no interest of taking care of them, just want to stay in power, and of course kill Jews, which is like the common pastime. Like they have to clear the rule of the infidels, the rule of the non-Muslim people from the Middle East, because the Middle East is the Muslim land, and we are the kofrim, the sinners, and if you have a land ruled by non-Muslims, it's like a blight upon I don't know, the will of Muhammad. So that's what happened. Now that doesn't make sense at all. That's not a good recipe, not for peace, not for prosperity, not for anything. And at that time, the media was a complete monopoly. There was no internet. You didn't even have WhatsApp. You can't even communicate with other people. You have just newspapers and television channels and movies, and they were all controlled by the left wing, who decided to impose on both the Arabs and on us this new country, this Palestinian country. And it was a very conflicting time to see. I basically grew up in a major gaslighting attempt. The 90s in Israel was a major gaslighting attempt. When there was terrorist attacks on the street, we could see Arafat speaking in Arabic, telling people that he's gonna free the land of Palestine from the Jews and whatever, and the entire media keep telling us that we're great, we're marching toward peace, we're a second away from peace, we're gonna get to the end times where there's not gonna be any more wars, there's not gonna be a need for an army in about 20 years. So it was a major gaslight. And even I, as a kid, basically how I saw it was, okay, there is these guys, Arabs, who claim they own this land. There is us, and we also claim we own this land. We have the Bible and they have the Quran. I did not know, now I know more of the history, but I didn't know more of the history. But I saw it as like, we have a claim and they have a claim. It's a claim against claim. So basically you can't search for proofs if you have a claim against claim. So if it's just a claim against claim and you can't seek actual justice, then I'm going to be on my side because I'm on my side and I'm going to support my claim because it's my team. I'm not going to support the other guy's team because basically they want to kill me, and it's not my team. And they didn't have any proof or any, I don't know, concrete claim. So yeah, major gaslight and major and very flawed ideology by very extreme people. It's hard to. The only way to understand now how extreme they are is that until this day, even now, the people who facilitated the Oslo Accords and are alive still believe it was a great idea, and still believe leaving the Gaza Strip in 2005 was a great idea. They still believe it till this day, and they go on public television and on public forums and say, It was a great idea. The fact that Hamas rose to power in the Gaza Strip, just a fluke. Just a fluke. Leaving the Gaza Strip was a great idea. Importing the PLO and giving them guns, great idea, wonderful idea. We just shouldn't have those pesky settlers over there to, I don't know, aggravate them or something. But giving Muslim terrorists guns and putting them right next to us, still wonderful idea.
You definitely see it today more, even here in the UK, people who are more left-wing and did support the Oslo more. I talk to my friends sometimes about it, and they would say before 7th of October, they were all about two-state solution. They believed that that was the way forward. But then 7th of October happened, and all of a sudden they realize it can't be the way they thought it was, and something has to change. And before we get to that, though, you said about that it was a media attempt at gaslighting.
Yeah.
It's a really nice way of putting it.
I'd like to tell you something about the two-state solution. So basically, the Arabs in Israel, the Palestinian side, they have 3 states already. What they actually have, we have one Jewish state, which is Israel, and the Arabs have actually 3 de facto states. Well, now not anymore, but before, until October 7th, they have 3 states. The original Palestinian state, which still exists till this day, is Jordan. So many people don't know this, but the Balfour Declaration actually stated that the state of Israel, the nation state of the Jewish people, is both the area we know today as Israel and the other side of the Jordan River, the entire area that is the country of Jordan. But because of Arab revolt, the British decided to split this country up, much like what happened with India and Pakistan, and to create a country for the Palestinians, which is the country east of the Jordan River that we know today as Jordan. So basically, Jordan is the country of Palestine. They have it all along. But then they revolted further, and the British wanted to split even the small part they gave to us, and they kind of did it anyway. So what happened is that in the Oslo Accords, we basically created another state for the Palestinians, which are the PLO areas in Judea and Samaria. And you can say they don't have a military, they don't have a representation in the UN, so they have an observation representation in the UN. And if you say that a country that doesn't have a standard military is not a country, there are plenty of those out there. And there are plenty of occupied countries, by the way. Japan was occupied until, I don't know, there are still American military bases in Japan and also Germany. So if you say the PLO is not a country, then, I don't know, Germany was not a country up until maybe the 90s, and also Japan was not a country. And from 2005 up until recently, they had a third de facto country, the Gaza Strip, which has its own autonomous rule, its own government, and its own people, and its own economy. So basically they had 3. Now I guess we're moving them down to 2. We're going to have to scale it back to 1, to the Jordan, the original country. That's what we're going to have to do eventually. And we work on it, but... Oh, I'm sorry, just a thing about it.
It's a very big topic, and hopefully in the future we'll have more people talking about the historical events at this stage, because I think there's so much to unpack as well on that side. You mentioned about scaling it back. When I was in university, a lot of the protesters come up to us and say about there's an apartheid regime in Israel. You know, it's Jewish supremacy against Arabs and things like that. When some people say scaling it back, they think, oh, so you do believe in genocide, you do believe in exterminating people who aren't like you. So how do you respond to those comments?
You can see, I don't have the exact numbers, but you can look at the number of Arabs in the state of Israel, not even in the occupied territories or whatever, but also in there. The number of Arabs grows dramatically. If you check it out, the number of Arabs in Israel from 1948 up until today, you can see a constant growing of the population. So what kind of genocide is it if the population keeps growing?
So
This is
there's not a
very
genocide.
Yes.
But what about an intention to genocide in terms of applying different democratic laws to Jews and not giving them to the Palestinians?
First of all, there are two things that are being conflated on purpose by those people, and it's even bigger than the Israel-Palestine thing. First, there is a conflation of human rights and the civilian rights. Yes, and the left use it all the time. So human rights are some very basic things, I guess. We can debate about what they are, but voting is not a human right. Voting is a civilian right, is a civil right. So basically, I can't fly to Britain and vote for the British Parliament, even though I am a human. But I cannot vote for the British Parliament because I am not a British citizen. It's a right reserved. I can also not be elected. I have to become a citizen first.
At this stage, I don't know. Even if you could, I don't know if you'd want to vote in the British Parliament.
I guess. But that's the thing. There's already this conflation of civil rights and human rights. So Palestinians, I guess the people under the PLO are not Israeli civilians. Okay, they're not our civilians. So they don't have our civil rights. By the way, there are people who lives in Israel, like some of the Druze villages in the Golan Heights that can get Israeli citizenship and can vote, and they refuse to become Israeli citizens of some sort of old hatred towards the Jews and the country of Israel. Not all
But there's
Druze,
also Druze
but there are some
inside.
Yes.
There's also Druze in the north, not in the Golan, who are very patriotic. You know, we know of the ones who draft to the army, to the IDF.
Oh yeah, it's a specific.
And it's not only
specific
Druze;
area
it's
in
also
Golan Heights.
Muslim Arabs as well, and obviously Christians and Arab Christians, etc.
Yeah, but basically what I'm saying here that there are many Arab citizens in Israel, about 20% or so. Their population also keeps growing, and they have every civil right that any Jew have in Israel. There is complete equality of civil rights.
See
I
that
dare
fact when you
find
tell that
one.
on university. When you
What?
tell that to university people that they have absolute full rights, it shocks them. They don't believe it. It can't be true. They
Oh,
talk
actually,
that there's apartheid.
they have de facto access rights. We can talk about it more, but actually, the freedom of religion is only impaired for the Jews in Israel, because there is only one place of worship for the Jews where Jews are not allowed to pray, and that's Temple Mount. Only Jews are prohibited to pray on Temple Mount. Well, maybe Christians too, but I don't know, but they don't try that much. But basically, Arabs can do whatever they want on Temple Mount, and that's a sovereign Israeli area, and that's the most important area in Israel. And only Jews are prevented to pray there. So basically, I don't know, maybe there's a Jewish apartheid in Israel. I don't know. Maybe
Yeah,
that's what's happening.
I think there were Al Jazeera used to publish these articles of Jewish settlers storming the Temple Mount, and there'll just be pictures of regular Israelis or more religious Zionists walking on. They weren't even storming; they were just going on. Yeah, so they would like to
We have
always.
armed forces. We have our armed forces there to keep the peace. We don't need to storm it. Why
Yeah,
we already conquered it? We don't need to storm it.
that's right. Well, we conquered it in '67, and then we let the was it the Waqf who took over which is a
Yes,
Jordanian-controlled entity
yeah.
in
Big mistake.
Jerusalem.
Big mistake. But like many mistakes, it's easy to do and hard to fix.
Yeah. So we get a sense that it may be a national thing, but for sure, there's no such thing. There's no desire to have discrimination in Israel. I just want to touch back on one of the things that you wrote in your article, which was very interesting about your experience, is that when you were in the army, you also felt, along with the generals, who also felt this sort of media gaslighting about the peace process, about during the 90s and the 2000s. And it's very interesting because people don't know this, but when I was in the army, I was in a combat unit in the paratroopers in the IDF, and there was the most strictest rules of engagement imaginable in rioting, in even apprehending terrorists. And people don't understand this, and the image that they have of the IDF soldier massacring civilians, it just can't be furthest from the truth. But how was it for you in the army, growing up with this sort of gaslighting that you wrote about?
Well, I don't know how much I can actually tell about the practices of the army, but basically what I felt in the army, and I talked about it with many other people when I went to university, and I was also in a combat unit in the Israeli Navy, and basically how I felt, our job was to patrol the marine border, the sea border between Gaza and Israel. So basically what I always felt is that we have to do everything we can to avoid hitting Arabs that are crossing the border knowingly. Arabs that we have no way of knowing if they're terrorists or not, that are they obviously know they're crossing the border because the border is marked with buoys, with signs in Arabic. They're crossing it very fast. They do whatever they want. There are millions of them. And the last thing we're allowed to do is to hit them, which is frustrating on, I guess, the how on our basically our mission part. It's frustrating. It's frustrating on the justice part, but I also felt a lot of time that we are endangering ourselves to keep the lives of people who are breaking the laws and would kill us if they have the chance.
And that's something that people just don't appreciate, the fact that the IDF's rules of engagement are so strict, so they would actually prefer to endanger the lives of IDF soldiers in order to minimize civilian casualties.
I also think it's wrong. It's what the IDF does, and I back then and today, and I kept talking about it every place I could. I believe it's wrong. It's immoral to endanger your soldiers in order to keep an enemy population, and that's the annexed Gaza Strip at this point. These are not Israeli Arabs. These are not even Arabs from our occupied areas, I guess, like Judea and Samaria. These are citizens of an enemy nation, and we are endangering ourselves in order to keep them safe, even though they are crossing the border.
It's
And
something
that's
that we in the international world, living in England, it's definitely something that for us it looks great because look at us, we have the most moral army. But we really sometimes do need to appreciate, especially here in the UK, that it comes at human cost, and the human cost is being paid by IDF soldiers, people like Shaked living in Israel, people like your son. I want to move on to the next question, which I think is also something that here in the UK we'd love to hear a bit more about. We don't hear enough voices about this at all, because you wrote in your article that you support Netanyahu. You credit him with a successful mission in Iran and the long strategic campaign that he did. Many Jews around the world strongly supported that war. And yet here in the UK, also obviously around the world, and even in Israel, there are those who don't support Netanyahu. One of the most popular claims is that he's being manipulated by extremists in order to save his own skin, or that he's only in it for power for himself. So what do you say to people who say that?
So I guess you can break it into two parts. So basically, who cares what he is motivated by? Who cares? If what he's doing is serving Israel and the world, who cares why he does it? Couldn't care less. If he's doing it to stay in power, if he's doing it to, I don't know, appease the radical side of the coalition, which is also a lie. They're not radical, they're the sensible parties in Israel. He's disarming Hamas, is disarming the Iran from the nuclear capabilities, is destroyed Hezbollah. Why should I care why he does it? Why would it matter to me? I just want the stuff that's good for Israel, and he's doing it. And if he wants to do it because he's get to be prime minister again, great. And the other part is, if you can, the claim that he's being manipulated is so detached from reality that you just have to look a little bit into the history of Israel and of Netanyahu himself. Do you remember what happened in 2015? 2015 was that's when Obama signed the how do they call it, the nuclear deal, basically the nuclear weapon deal with Iran. He signed it in 2015, and back then I used to work with a leftist boss. My boss was an extreme leftist. He was a good guy, and he's a very cordial leftist, which means we can have actual meaningful conversations, and he wasn't just yelling at me like what happens with most lefties. And he basically what he says like, why do you vote for Netanyahu? He's just out there for himself. He just care about himself. He just something. He's not moral. He's corrupt. He's doing this. He's doing this. He's doing that. And what I told him was kind of like what I just told you. I told like, look, I don't care what he is motivated by. If he does the things I want to happen, if he makes the thing I want to happen in Israel, why should I care what he's motivated by? He's not he's not Moses. I don't look up to him like he's Moses. I don't get my value from him. But that conversation made me think about, who would I look like Moses? What would an actual leader be like? What would an actual leader have to do in order for me to recognize and say like, my God, he's like Moses, he's like King David? Because, people like us lived in those times, and it would be, I guess it would be very disappointing from our side if we live during the King David era and we just say like, oh, he's just another political leader doing his stuff to keep his chair. It would mean we are it would make us basically very blind, very detached from reality to think something like that. So I sat down with myself and I said, okay, what would a leader have to do to me to consider him to be like a great leader, like a biblical great leader? And what I came up with, okay, it will have to be something that is absolutely good for the future of Israel, but it would come at and you have to insist on doing that thing, even though it might be very unpopular, and the benefit of that action will be far off in the future, but the penalty for that action would be very large and right here in the present of him doing it. And you have to do it against all odds. You have to make this sort of shot against all odds. And basically a week later, what happened is that Netanyahu announced he's going to the American Congress to speak against the Iran nuclear deal. Which basically, I don't know if many people remember, basically Obama made a deal with the Iranians that the Iranians will basically say they're not enriching uranium to make a bomb. There would be no real way to inspect them, as we actually seen in the coming years when the nuclear authorities tried to inspect them and they just limited their access to their facilities, which is it's very obvious Iran is not going to be, honest with the inspections. Very, very obvious. And they will get some sort of American funding for this effort. And in the year 2025, there will now be legally allowed to enrich uranium for an atomic bomb, which we are now in the year 2025. So basically, about this thing, this war with Iran is being manipulated. Okay, he was trying to prevent Iranian nuclear back then, back in 2015. He went to speak again on Congress against Obama, one of the most powerful presidents in American history, and obviously against the entire Israeli media. We didn't have our right-wing channel, Channel 14 back then. We only had our regular left-wing sources of media. And also YouTube wasn't that big in Israel news distribution in 2015. So basically, he got all the blame. He was blamed up until now. He was always blamed that he's destroying our relationship with America when he actually saved it, and that he's, I don't know, motivating Iran to enrich uranium even further, because if we have an agreement with them and play nice, they won't enrich uranium. And obviously, the people who manipulate him, I don't remember if they were in politics in 2015, 10 years ago.
I think like Smotrich would have been the most senior at the time, and he would have been very far down in Bennett's. It was still by TOD in 2015, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. It was like the ByteOD was like this. How would you say? It's like a coalition of several smaller parties back then.
Yeah,
And
it's either that he's manipulated or that he's let extremists into his government, and I think this is it's such a very interesting idea that he's been in politics for so long, and yet he's managed to be manipulated by people who've been in politics.
But that's the kind of duality
for very little.
They also treat Trump with this duality. That is like they also say about both Bibi and Trump that he's an evil, manipulative genius that can manipulate everyone and the fabric of reality itself in order to fit his selfish needs. But he's also kind of a weak, dumb, fragile person who can be manipulated by every, I don't know, bully who comes around.
Right, so which one is it?
You have to pick one.
Yeah, I'm just conscious of the time, and as much as we want to continue, I really want to move on to our last question. Shaked, what do you feel the future holds for us young Jews who are passionate about our Judaism and about Israel? And where do you see Zionism go in the future?
Well, I very much looking forward for the next decade to be like the decade after the 6 Days War. Without the Yom Kippur War, we have to stay vigilant. But this is a great time to embrace our Judaism and our national roots of Judaism, because Judaism is not only a religion. Judaism is a religion from the ancient times, which is both a race and a religion and a nationality. So I think we are looking toward a great return to form. You can be proud Jews. We can be more like the biblical days of the Jewish heroes from the Bible. We can dominate this area, not an apartheid dominant, but we can be a major force in this area. We can be the city on the hill that everyone wants to be friends with because of their power, because they are strong and smart and capable and not afraid to destroy their enemies and not afraid to cooperate with the people who wants to be their friends. And this is the kind of I don't know way to live that is described during the time of King David and Shlomo and Solomon, and also in the prosperous time of the Maccabean kingdom, of the kingdom of the Maccabees. That the land of Israel, the kingdom of Judea, might be small, and it will never be as big as, I don't know, the Assyrian Empire or the Roman Empire, but it is always a strong force to be reckoned with, and you would always prefer to have them on your side at any cost. So this is what I see coming. This is what I hope will come.
Shaked, this is such a beautiful picture to look to the future. Thank you so much. It's been a really honor to have you as our very first guest. If you want to read more about Shaked's opinions and ideas, check out the 3 articles I mentioned in the beginning of the website. I think it's 3 excellent articles. I couldn't recommend more. Shaked, any final thoughts before we go?
No, I guess just, Jews out there, stay safe and be proud.
And be proud. That's definitely something you can end up. Thank you guys for listening and watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next episode.